All right, welcome everyone to the first Straight Up Craft Dev Day of 2015. We haven't done one of these in a while, and wanted to get started doing them again. There's still lots and lots of stuff to explore and craft, and the guys at Pixel and Tonic keep us busy on the learning side by adding new features and improving what's there. So today we're going to be diving into the cache tag. Specifically the tag that Craft provides for the for caching. There are several different ways we can consider caching on our sites, and we'll discuss some of the alternate ways at the end. But the primary part of this will focus on that tag specifically. So I'm going to share my screen here, and so the cache tag. When do we want to use it? We want to use this when we want to improve and optimize things on our site, and it helps reduce the number of queries to the database, and it has a lot of other neat features as well. So I'm just going to start off with a pretty simple example, and we can kind of evolve that example. So the basic cache tag is just an opening and closing tag in Twig, and we can wrap it around some content on our page in order to cache things. It also has several different settings that allow us to kind of make it behave in a way that might be more appropriate to our situation. We have a couple options for scope, so we can cache globally, or we can cache using a specific key which we create, which could be unique to a URL or a user. We can only cache we can cache things based on that key, so that different users will cache different types of content for themselves and not cause trouble in how we're doing that. We can cache based on duration. So we've got tags like cache for 3 weeks, which would cache our content for a amount of time. We also have the option of fortnight and forthnight, if we prefer one over the other. And we can cache until a specific date. So that gives us a kind of allows us to use an event date or something like that. Additionally, we've got conditional statements we can use for the cache tag. So we can cache if something is true, and we can also cache unless a certain condition is met. So in the example in the docs here, we're caching if no user is logged in, but if a user is logged in, then we don't cache that scenario. All right, so we've got a cache tag. It helps us optimize things, and it allows us to cache with a different scope, a different duration, and a different conditional type statement. We can combine these statements together, or just use them individually. So let's take a look at how this cache tag works and how it ties into the database. I've got a pretty simple site set up here, just the base website, and I'm going to start off with our home page here. To make sure we are starting from a clear cache, I'm going to go to the settings area and clear all caches, which will clean things up for us. We're really just working with template cache. The cache tag is template cache, so if you only needed to clear the stuff for the cache tag itself, you'll only need to check that template caches box. I'm also going to pull up a database program here so we can start looking at what's happening in the database. Craft, when it uses this tag, it saves data to 3 different tables in the database: the Craft template cache criteria table, the template cache elements table, and the template caches table. So we'll take a look at those to see how things are going, and we're starting off with just our simple home page here, which outputs cache. Brad insisted that I share this quote with you during this presentation. There are only two hard things in computer science: cache invalidation and naming things. All right, so we've got a cache tag. What happens when we reload our page with the cache tag on it? If I refresh this page and jump over to our database, I can refresh the database tables here, and nothing happens because I didn't save my file. So that's without cache. We see no variables appear in there. If I save my index file now, refresh that page again, and jump back to the database, we'll see that some of these tags tables start to reflect some data in them. So if you're ever trying to troubleshoot and see what is actually being cached, a helpful table to look at is template caches here. You'll see there's a body field, and if you look in that database table, you can actually see exactly what part of the page is being saved. If you're using dynamic content or something and something's not behaving properly, this can sometimes kind of reveal what you might be doing that is not what you want to be doing, or it might just inform you of what's there. We see if we start to go through these different features that Craft has, we can say cache globally in our template, and if we refresh that and take a look at what's happening over in our database, we'll see that global caching tends to, it just doesn't add a path to the settings. So that will be saved and can be reused on another page, and Craft will know that it's not specific to a specific URL. If we add a key, so we can update our cache to use key current user. If we want to do a user specific cache, if we refresh there, what did I miss?
Current user isn't a string. You need to pass in a string. So we could do current user at username.
Got it. Yes. All right, so we refresh that, and you'll see our cache key becomes that user's name now. So the unique thing in the system that's referring to who's caching is now something that we've specifically defined. I'm going to skip the duration ones, but you'll see that if we add anything regarding cache until or cache for 3 weeks, it will update the expiration date of the cache that we'll see in the database. And we can also start doing things like the if statements of if Craft request is mobile browser. We'll see if we refresh this one, nothing will happen. Nothing will get added because I'm not on a mobile browser, I'm on a desktop. So all of these things are kind of happening. All of these things are adjusting how we're saving that data to the database, and if we wanted to consider how that was changing, we could do that. Now Craft adds another cool feature to Craft to its caching tag, that it helps you cache bust if your users are editing content. So one problem in the past might have been we create our home page, we want it to be optimized, so we cache it, and then somebody comes into the system and they update the page to have a different title or something. And when they save, it would take some amount of time, and you'd have to wait until that cache expired before you saw those changes on the website. Now, if we start looking to these other tables, what Craft does, if it can identify the elements that you are caching in the system, so if your elements are defined within the cache tag, and I think in the case of single entry pages, Craft just knows about them, but correct me if I'm wrong, Brandon. Craft seems to know it's on a single entry page and record that ID.
It's actually not even worrying about that.
Okay.
It's very specifically if you are doing anything with an element within the cache and end cache tags, it will just remember that element.
Okay.
So if you were to remove all of your template code, if you were to replace the contents of your cache tag with just some static HTML, that cache would not get busted when you change the entry.
Okay. And when we add reference to an element, it's taking that into account as it saves to the database. So if we want to look at where that's happening here, the cache template cache elements table. Why not refresh? Maybe I need to refresh. So I guess the cache was cleared because I updated that, maybe. All right. So our template cache element gets recorded here as an element in the system. So Craft knows that when we update that element ID 6, which was our home entry here, it knows to break the cache when it has a chance. And I'm not sure on the timing of that. I don't think it's instantaneous. I think it might, but it is fairly quick.
It's instant.
It's instant? Okay.
In the event that a cache tag is already aware of which elements are included in it, like this, it will be instant, like right when you save the entry or delete it.
Okay. So that's cool. And if we have lots of different elements within our tag, Craft's going to store all of those and kind of keep an eye on them all for us. So we can be a little more aggressive with our caching around things that users might be editing, and not have to worry as much about getting pages not updating based on what we're doing. And I might have been focusing template cache criteria. That's actually where I was focusing on the template caches table and how the criteria kind of changed the data being saved to that. But if we start adding criteria to the cache tag, this is where that data gets stored, I believe.
That's actually not true.
Not true. This is why I invite you guys.
Yeah. So so the event where the cache would not instantly get generated is, let's say that within your cache tag you're actually querying for entries. Like, let's say you just want to output the latest blog post or something like that. So there's an actual query happening within the cache tag. Mm-hmm. So on top of the cache tag recording all the different elements that are being accessed within it, it's also going to store whatever queries are being requested within it. And basically any of your parameters that you pass on your query right here, those get JSONified and stored in this element cache criteria table.
Okay.
And so basically, it's always aware of any elements that are being used within the cache tag, as well as any queries that are being run within the cache tag. And this is the case where it's not instantaneous. If you were to create a new entry, at that point, there's a background task that kicks off, and it starts looping through all of its recorded criteria rows to see if there's any cache tags that, while they previously didn't include the entry because it didn't exist, it checks to see if those queries would result in that new entry showing up in there. And if it finds a match, then at that point it would clear the cache tag. It would clear the cache as well. So that's the only place where we can't be instantaneous, is if there's a case where an entry needs to start showing up in a cache tag, whereas previously it did not. And that's where this table comes in handy.
Okay. Great. Yeah, I knew I had read that it wasn't instantaneous in some cases. So there we go. There you have it, folks. Better information. All right. So now So in the context of that, the cache is cleared in several instances. It can be cleared when new entries are created or deleted or saved, and it can be cleared when you just need to clear it and go to the settings part of the home page, and or the settings part of your craft install and clear it. And then it would also clear if a cache expired, it would not, it would get cleared once it's expired there as well. All right, so I wanted to then turn. Okay, so let's pause there quickly and just reach out. Does anybody have any questions on anything we've covered so far about the cache tag and what it's doing? All right. Next, I wanted to kind of dive into, how do we even know this cache tag is working, and if it's doing what we want it to be doing? And so I've turned on dev mode on this installation of Craft. So if I look at my console here in Chrome, every time the page loads, it outputs some useful things for us to understand what the page is doing. It outputs log files, and then it outputs this profiling summary report. So if we look at this profiling report, up at the top, we're going to get a little bit of information that might be handy to us as we analyze what's going on here. We get the time of execution for the page, how much memory was used, and how many queries to the database happened. So let's simplify here and just remove the cache tag for a moment and load this page. And if we look at our data here, it took, I'll just start another. So without cache home page, we get.
You might want to reload it one more time.
Okay. Yeah.
And the reason for that is because you just made a change to your template, so you have to keep in mind that there's a little bit more memory and effort involved in that first request because Twig needs to compile the template.
Got it.
Which is not something that would happen on a typical request.
Okay. All right, and we see, this is a pretty simple page, and I've got a heavier example after this to show. I thought I'd start with a simple one because sometimes we're considering all these different scenarios. So if we add that cache tag back now, I guess still this first load that I'm making is going to be relatively similar in its profile because we hadn't cached the content yet. But now that we loaded with the cache tag, Craft has added that information to the database. We see a similar time as 0.3 seconds, queries were 15. And now that our data is cached, our page content here is cached in the database, we can reload and see the cached information, and we see slight difference, and really don't see much change in load speed or memory usage. We see a different number of queries, and this is actually probably the addition of the cache query. I'd have to look at all the queries, but
yeah, that's right.
We're actually making one extra database call, so we're actually not improving much of anything in this use case. It's not going much faster, and we're increasing the number of queries we're making to the database in this case. So when does the tag start to become more helpful? It becomes helpful when we're starting to do heavier database operations. And I imported 100 entries here to the news channel. And I just kind of made up a data structure that was a little more intense. If we look at a news entry here, we have a title and a body, and then we have this matrix field where we have a related user and a related news item, and we have multiple matrix fields. So I have 100 entries with multiple relationships on them. And if we look at our listing page, I'm querying that news entry, and I'm looping through, and I'm looping through the matrix block, and I'm outputting information on the user and on the related news item, and I'm going to be doing that 100 times for each entry, and then times 2 within the matrix blocks for each entry. So I think numerically speaking that equates to lots of database queries. And if we go to our listing page here, and I don't have a cache tag on this yet, if we go to our listing page, I've broken something. I do have a cache tag, didn't clean up. So right now Craft is chugging along, making all the database queries it needs to get all of that content for some reason, because I wanted to output way too many entries on this page for simple output. And all right, now we've got our output. We can see we've got lots and lots of entries here, and everything got output accurately. And now let's look at our profiling report for this. We've got a different situation this round, and we'll go without cache listing. And we see that it took 20 seconds or so to load that page. Used 80, I never know how to read these right, 80 megabytes. 80,000 kilobytes of memory. Total queries, 519 queries to our database. So we're all of a sudden we're really creating a lot of work for our database, or our Craft, to get all that information out of the database for us. So what happens when we add a cache tag to this this scenario? I'm going to wrap the cache tag around everything inside the body block here, and I'm going to reload the page, and it's actually going to take another 20 seconds here for me to reload the page while we cache things. And we'll see previous to this we were just caching that one page in the database, but as this page loads with 100 entries, we're doing a lot more, we're caching a lot more stuff now. So we'll take a look at how, once this finishes loading, we'll take a look at how these tables changed. If we look at our template caches table, we'll see one new entry here for our listing page, and we can take a look at the content in that, and we'll see our 100 entries being output there. If we look at our template cache elements, we'll see lots and lots of entries now, because we have 100. Actually, it might be way more. We have 311 rows in the table now, so that's not only the 100 entries, but that's the relationships as well. So Brandon, is it right to say that Craft is also watching all of those related entries, so if updates are made to them, the cache would break?
Any elements that are accessed within the cache tags will get included in that table.
Handy. All right, so Craft's watching out for us there as well, and now we see our template cache criteria table also has a lot more going on in it as it's processing all of these different queries to the database necessary to get back the information we're displaying. All right, now that page should have taken a similar amount of time to load. We see 23 seconds here, and 523 queries. So we've got a similar situation, and now let's do this with cache and refresh. Or no, yes, refresh. Okay, it's loaded. Hooray. Let's see how long that took. And we see that the page is now loading in 0.25 seconds or so, and with a total of 11 queries. And I would guess, if we look at this home page, it looks like Craft's taking about 10 queries or so to just load Craft. Is that fair to say, Brandon? I've never really looked into this, so I'm kind of making this up.
Yeah, so the difference there is that this particular page is not a single entry page. So on the first example, when you were accessing the first template, that was actually, you were accessing in a specific entry's URL. So one of those queries in there, one of those 11 or 12, is going to be determining if there's an entry that exists with the same URL that you're requesting. And if there is, which was the case in the first template, if there is a matching element, then there's going to be one additional query to actually fetch that element, that entry in that case. Whereas in this page, like that first query came back negative. There aren't any entries that are set to this testing URL you have here. Okay, so it didn't have to get that single entry that gets the entry variable automatically defined and all that kind of stuff. That's the one difference between the two.
Got it. Yeah, and then the big query in there for us this time, which is saving us all the resources, is the query that's grabbing that content from our template caches and getting our 100 entries from this single field in the database right here. And already has them as text, so it doesn't need to process any more database calls for that. All right, I'm going to pause there again. Does anybody else have any other questions there?
Yeah, I've got one question. Hi, guys. So each item that's been outputted there in the for loop, that's got quite a few related entries in it. Is there ever a case to cache each individual item there rather than the listing itself?
I've seen some conversations about that. So if somebody wants to give a better answer while I do this, go for it. I'm going to actually just say let's test that for my answer. I think the answer is yes. At least if you read every answer on Stack Exchange that's tagged with cache, you'll read at least one or two where somebody was saying that they were caching individual entries and it was turning out to be more performant. I don't know what conditions that would be worth considering in, but if you're able to test that, maybe that. So here we would want to say for entry in entries, we're going to cache each entry. So we've updated that. So now we're not including that initial query to get all of our entries in there, but we are including the loop. And I think I cleared everything here. All right, so let's load that once. So we'll say cache listing each. Did that?
So I don't know if you noticed, there's one issue with this approach. If you take a look at your content, you've actually got the exact same entry being output 100 times.
Yes. So I didn't I didn't plan for this. So we could say with key.
Yes. You do with key and then do testing dash entry.id, something like that.
Okay. And is this a string that
using key? I'm sorry, using key.
Yeah, I'm using key. And is this like Twig? Does it?
Yeah.
Oh, I haven't overplayed with this beyond the examples I prepared. So, all right. So there. Yeah, and I guess, does everybody see what Brandon was saying here? It's like because I wasn't using a unique key, I basically output the same entry every time because when it cached it, it was caching it based on the the URL, I guess. Does it use the URL as the key by default?
No, each individual cache tag gets its own dynamic key by default. So like as Twig is actually compiling the template, the very first time it's compiling it after you've made a change, if you haven't specified the using key parameter, then it will just assign each individual cache tag a unique key. And that's what you end up seeing in that cache key column in the database. It's just like some random, string of alphanumeric characters.
Yeah, and then how does it know that this is the cache tag that that alphanumeric string relates to? Is it
because in the compiled template, it's actually at that point spitting out PHP code saying, key equals and then like this string of code. So
okay.
Yeah, to fully explain it, you have to like be familiar with like how the PHP compilation process works. But
okay, we'll just trust it.
Just remember, it's like on a per tag basis. It doesn't matter if it's in a for loop or not. If you've typed the cache tag once, it's going to get one unique key for the template.
All right. Right, so we've updated this. Now we're caching based on an entry ID testing key. So we should get different results. Brandon, do you have a more concise answer for when it is appropriate to cache on a per entry basis versus a all entries basis?
I don't know. I guess, okay, so like let's say you've got a lot of stuff going on a per entry basis, and let's say that's happening within like a paginated list of entries. Like let's say rather than showing 100 in one list, you're actually showing 10 pages of 10 entries. I suppose in that case it could be faster to cache on a per entry basis with a custom key like you just did. That way, if any one of those entries gets updated, you're not losing the entire news section's worth of caches. You're just losing that one entry.
Got it.
So the disadvantage is you still do have to manually query for the full list of entries.
Okay.
But so there is still like a few extra queries on the page, but
that might make so let's say you have a high trafficked site and or maybe it's a high trafficked site and a highly edited site, and you don't want every time somebody updates to
it's a highly edited site. You don't want to be losing all your caches anytime any entry is updated. You want to be able to, it's one single query to get like the list of 10 entries that need to show up on the page you're on. Like that one query isn't going to be too expensive. What's expensive is when for each entry you've got a matrix field within it that has its own set of queries, and then you've got within that each matrix block has additional queries, and then it becomes an exponential thing like you saw. You have one simple little template with 5 lines of code, and it ended up costing, 500 queries. So that's the kind of example where, where per entry caching actually be really nice. So that you're only, you're only executing one single query every single page, and the cache tags are basically caching all the individual entry relations and matrix blocks and all that kind of stuff for you.
Got it.
The other thing, this is like totally, there's no actual code in place here to talk about, but I don't know if any of you guys have used. Solspace has a module for expression engine called preparse, I think, something like that. And basically, the idea is you create this template, and the template gets executed anytime you save an entry, and kind of caches some content as the entry is being saved. There isn't anything quite like it that I know of for Craft right now, but it's something that I keep thinking, like, boy, this would be really handy in certain situations, and this would be kind of one of them, where you could actually take, rather than leaving it up to like the end user to have to be the one that like reloads the page, and oh, this time it wasn't cached, so they had to wait 10 seconds for the thing to load. You could actually, like, the idea would be you'd have like some kind of hidden field type that is set to a template, set to whatever you want to be cached for that entry, and then as you're saving the entry, it just automatically executes that twig template and stores it just as one other custom field alongside the entry. This is kind of how pre-parse works, and this would be very easy to do, very easy to port for Craft. I don't know if anyone's done it though, but that was like when you get into the idea of like per entry caching, like it would actually save yourself quite a bit of SQL queries, because that is another disadvantage of per entry caching, is there is going to be one SQL query per entry that has to get run just to get that cache. Whereas if you could get that content, that cached content, right into a custom field on the entry, then it's already going to be there. It's already going to be ready for you just to output as like entry.cached content, something like that.
Yeah, there were some, in the Stack Exchange, there was some interesting, somebody was caching their navigation and then running the replace filter on the cached variable to like swap the active nav state or something like that. It was interesting.
So it's basically a case where you would normally not think it's a good use case for caching because it's changing.
Yeah, yet they were actually treating the cache.
URL you're on.
Yeah, they were actually treating the cache thing as a variable after it was.
Actually, and I don't think Steve Abraham's on here, but we just worked on something interesting with him. I'll have to pull it out, but it's pretty cool solution we ended up coming up with. He had this very complicated template because he had all these relationships and he wanted to like pull in certain entries in a very specific order. I'm sorry, he wanted to pull in a certain set of entries based on certain criteria, and he wanted to display them at random, followed by another set of entries in the same kind of bucket but with different criteria, also displayed at random, but after the first one, and then a third set, and the same basic thing. So basically 3 sets of random entries, and the only order was that the first set had to come first, second set had to come second, third set had to come third. And we were going back and forth, trying to figure out like what the right way to go about it was. And we ended up caching we ended up doing a thing where we would cache within cache tags we would select all 3 sets of entries, not at random, just grab them, and we would output within the cache tags. We would output JSON, a JSON representation of those entries. So we actually created this JSON output, and the cache tags we placed within a set tag pair. So we would do like set first entry group JSON, and then do a thing where you have like the set tag and then the end set tag separately. We would do set first group JSON, and then inside that cache, and then get the first set of entries and output the JSON of those. Same thing for the second set, same thing for the third set. And then once you were past all of that within the template, then the next thing was then say set first set of entries equals first set JSON, and then the JSON decode filter, which actually I think you might have had to write because that didn't actually exist, but that was really easy to do. But anyway, so then through JSON, we were actually caching like this set of entries in JSON, and then we were able to decode them back into an array after, like, whether it had come from the cache or whether we had just created it, it didn't matter. And once we had it in an array, then we could pass it through the random filter, or the shuffle filter, I'm sorry, shuffle filter to get it in that random order, and then he was able to loop through those entry data and output them. So it was a very complicated solution, but it ended up working out really well. So we're actually caching JSON data representing the different entries that he wanted, but not necessarily in the final order that they would show up on the page. So I'll have to pull that out. Maybe a fun Stack Exchange post to kind of show that off, show how that worked out.
Yeah. Cool.
But the point is that you don't have to cache things that are actually going to be output directly. Like you can cache. You're just caching data. It's just you're just it's just strings that you can manipulate later on and do whatever you want with them. So, putting it within set and end set tags gives you some more flexibility that you might not have otherwise.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, and I guess so. Just to back to look at the quick results we got from this quick test. The first each entry query took 24 seconds and had 919 queries. And I guess, is this higher number because cache is actually being saved to the database on that first load time?
Yes.
Okay. So
yeah, for each cache tag, there's one query to see if it already exists in the database, and if it doesn't, then it has to do all of its normal queries and then have one final query at the end where it saves the data.
Got it. Yeah, and then the second time we load, we bring it down to 1.1 seconds or so, and we have kind of a query for each entry, and the base 10 or 11 queries and a query for each entry. So, all right. Does anybody else have any other interesting cache situations they want to share or talk through? All right. I had one more thing on my list to kind of just explore together if we wanted to take a look at it. So there's right and wrong ways to use the cache tag, and I think kind of looking at a few of these examples, we start to see that, if we're really just caching nothing, we might just be adding, if we're caching stuff that doesn't involve lots of database queries, we might just be adding database queries to the picture and not adding much value. As we start to have more intensive data requirements, we could see much greater benefits by caching. So caching isn't perfect for every situation, but as your data needs increase, it does become more valuable. Now, there's other right and wrong ways to use the cache tag, and I'm going to revert back to our simple example for this. So, and I'm going to clear cache just to start fresh in the database if we want to look at it again. All right. All right, so here if we load this page with cache, we get our expected one item and pretty simple output in the database. Now, what happens if we start moving these cache tags around? What if we wrap our cache tag around the block element? And this is a no-no, I'll say up front, but I can't explain why. Maybe Brandon will be able to clarify. I've thought about it, but I don't know for sure. Let's look at the example here, though. We resave that, and now we refresh that page, and that, I guess this cache tag is in a different location, so it gets another ID, and it gets added to the database. But if we look at our body field, nothing is stored in there. It's not actually caching anything for us. So we don't want to be putting our cache tags around our block content, our block tags, and I think that has to do with the kind of the order that Twig processes things. But if Brandon, you can explain it in better terms, I'll defer to you there.
Well, block tags don't output anything directly.
They actually get output in the layout.
Think of it this way. Like, so when you have output tags, and cache tags are fundamentally an output tag. They are responsible for, ultimately they're responsible for outputting whatever is cached or not cached within them. A block tag, although it seems like it's an output tag, at the point when a block tag gets executed, it's getting executed by the parent template, and it's actually sucking in the contents of the block tag. It's not, so the block tag is never actually outputting anything directly. It's just a function that's called, and its content is rendered, and it returns the content, but not necessarily the output. Just returns it to whatever was calling the block. At which point it would be the responsibility of the layout templates, the very top level's block tag, to do the final outputting of it. So it depends on, it depends on what template you're in. But if you're in the layout template and it's the top level block tag, in that case, then yes, the secondary function is that it will actually output the results. Yeah. But when you're in a subtemplate, it doesn't have anything to do with being output. It's just rendering HTML, and then that HTML is getting sucked out of it into something else.
And here I've moved our cache tag up to the layout template now, wrapping around the parent block tag. And if we refresh here, we'll see what Brandon was talking about, that now we actually are, again, outputting content on the page. And we wrapped it around this main tag as well, so we're getting a little bit more that we're caching, but it is working. So you do want to be careful where you're using these and make sure that you're wrapping them kind of tightly around your content needs, not around the twig syntaxes. I didn't test this with the layout tag, but I would guess something similar might happen there. Wrapping it around the layout tag here probably won't do. We can test if I'm curious. Anybody want to predict results? All right, so here we're caching our layout tag, and if we save that to the database, again we get nothing, no benefits of doing that that way. But if we did go back to our parent template and wrap that whole template in a cache tag, we would get our output again. All right, so any other cache tag questions?
Yeah, me again. I might have another couple if we've got time.
Yeah.
So one thing I was wondering is, a scenario where you've maybe got thousands and thousands of entries in the database, going back maybe a period of years. So maybe we're talking about a news section, and maybe anything after a year old you want to class as kind of legacy content. And that legacy content, it doesn't matter if it shouldn't be included in any clearing caches. So the way I'm thinking I might do it at the moment is to do some kind of conditional in the template to say, if this content is older than a year, use the cold cache tag. If not, use the cache tag. I just wondered if that was maybe the right way to go about it. So that would mean that if a new entry was created and the cache was cleared, anything older than a year old would just be untouched.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and your logic would be, it would actually take place in Twig before you actually choose which cache tag to use. You would say if entry A, entry post date is
yeah. So maybe I don't even know if this is possible, Brandon, to set a variable to say, cache type, and if the post date is older than a year, so cache type equals cold cache. If not, it equals cache, and then use that variable to actually, output the tag name that you wanted to use.
And so for anybody not picking up the reference, Jamie's referring to a plugin, Cold Cache, which roundabout way to get there, but it's a Cold Cache plugin which basically works like the cache plugin, but doesn't do the element. When we talked through when somebody saves a new entry, it doesn't bust the cache. It just stores it forever. So,
Jamie, I wonder if you could do like a multi-level. You can't dynamically set which tag is going to get used, but you could do like this through like multi-level includes, where you have one include template that holds all of the actual cached content. And then you create two middleman templates that both include that first template, one of them wrapping it with a cache tag and one of them wrapping it with a cold cache tag.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And then in the very parent template, you could just determine which template to include, which middleman template to include, depending on what you want.
Yeah. Yeah. I get what you mean.
That's the best idea I can think of off the top of my head.
Yeah. Cool. Well, the other thing I was thinking about was another question is there any what's the best strategy for trying to keep the total steps that the I can't remember what it's called, delete stale templates or delete stale cache goes through when you've got a large number of entries, or you've got a lot of content in the database? Are there any strategies to try and reduce the number of tasks that have to be run through when the cache is cleared?
Not really, unless you want to start making lots of custom element types. But I mean, I can tell you you can update to the latest version of Craft that just came out, because we fixed a bug that actually will speed that task up a little bit. So there's that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I mean, unfortunately, that's just kind of, it's hard for Craft to be very certain about like which one of those potential cached queries would result in this new entry showing up. So it's kind of we let off with that quote Brad gave Ben, saying cache invalidation is like one of the hardest problems in computer science, and it's very true. This is particularly the hardest part of it, is like trying to figure out which caches should get invalidated that didn't previously have an element but do now, or should now. One thing we were thinking of is potentially replacing that system with something a little more explicit, like where within your section settings or something like that, you could actually say when an entry is saved, clear any caches that are involved on this URL or that URL, stuff like that. So have it be more of a URL-based kind of thing. Like, so you just tell Craft like the kinds of URLs to look for in the first place, and clear those caches. So that would be a lot faster. There'd be a lot more setup. So, I don't know.
Yeah, that's something I was thinking of as well. Like, an author might just want to update one entry, because they've made a typo or whatever. They don't want to clear the whole cache. So they just want to update an entry and actually not run the, they only want to run the update cache on that one particular entry. I know a lot of that might filter through to others depending on what it is that they're editing. But if they're just editing some plain text or something,
the problem is we're not storing, like, by the time that we're saving caches, we're not storing, and this value came from this field and blah blah. We're not storing it on that fine grain. All we're doing is storing, like, well, you had a cache tag and here's the final results of what whatever HTML came out of it. So it'd be hard to kind of track that down. Short of doing, I don't know, having a plugin that like somehow cancels the cache. Maybe we put an event there that makes it cancelable, and then you could just do a find and replace query or something like that on the cache table. But it'd be difficult to figure out how to implement that, even with full access to everything. It's a hard problem.
Cool.
Hey guys, I've got to excuse myself. I gotta go to another thing right now. So
thanks
for hosting this, Ben, and I hope I was somewhat helpful.
Yeah, thanks for your input, Brandon. Have a great day.
Yeah, you too. Bye, guys.
Thanks, Brandon.
Okay, folks. Well, I'm pretty much at the end of the different examples and topics I had to talk through too. The one remaining thing I wanted to mention is this is just one type of cache in Craft, and it's called template caches, kind of more technically. You're also going to have data caches, which are stored in the Craft storage runtime cache folder, and Twig does its own kind of caching. You can have caching, you know, at your server level, or your content delivery network can be doing something like that for files as well. So there's a lot of different places caching can happen, and this is really a tightly integrated option with Craft CMS in the way that this cache tag works, closely with the database and closely with the knowledge of the elements and content in the database that you might be modifying. So does anybody else have any other comments they want to make? Or otherwise I can wrap on up. All right, so I'll just wrap up. So thanks for everyone coming out. It's always fun to kind of meander through these topics a little bit and see what we learn along the way. I've been recording this, and I will put it up on Straight Up Craft. We've got Straight Up Craft Dev Day is a series of similar conversations, kind of loosely structured conversations. And Brandon and Brad are frequently a part of them and offer their insights into the deeper product that a lot of us might not have had the time to get. So if you're looking for any kind of casual conversations about some topics in Craft, we've done Vagrant, we've done element types, we've done different things, just looking at the entry tags and content and stuff like that. So there's a lot of different topics to dive into. Thanks for coming out, and we'll have that up in a few days, and until next time.
Thanks, Ben. Appreciate it.